Measures go into effect in Venezuela. International Criminal Court prosecutors appeal the acquittal of former Ivorian President Laurent Gbagbo. And thousands of commuters in South Africa left stranded as public transport operators strike. Hello and welcome to Telesur English. I am Estefania Bravo in Quito, Ecuador. This is From the South. Venezuela has kicked off with a new period of radical quarantine in the South American country. Our correspondent Leonel Retamal has more from Caracas.
A new period of radical quarantine kicked off this Monday in Venezuela with the aim of establishing new ways to contain the spread of COVID-19. This measure was taken after Venezuela registered new cases of the virus. Nonetheless, these figures remain below Latin American average. Authorities have informed that transportation between states will be halted, and in Caracas, the metro will not be working. Additionally, those who are allowed to transit are only healthcare, security, food, telecommunications, and security workers. Authorities have called on people to continue to use face masks and other preventive measures to help contain the virus.
We thank our correspondent Leonel Retamal for that report. Brazil officially surpassed 50,000 coronavirus deaths on Sunday, with more than 1 million total cases across the country. Brazil, the world's second COVID-19 hotspot following the United States, now has a total of 1,085,038 confirmed cases and 50,617 deaths. But experts have continued to warn that real numbers are likely a lot higher due to a lack of testing. Thousands protested in several Brazilian states demanding the resignation of far-right President Jair Bolsonaro. As part of ongoing mobilizations against the government and in reject of racism, social organizations and health workers' unions have continued to raise their voices against what they say is a lacking response to the pandemic. Citizens widely agree that Bolsonaro has not done much to fight the emergency, as Brazil currently stands as the second country most affected by COVID-19, surpassing 1 million cases.
What is real is that we did not want to be in this situation. We wanted to stay home, caring for our health, for our families, but we cannot just remain silent. Silence is useless as the government attacks our democracy, attacks our rights. We are out there to defend freedom, justice, democracy, but above all, the life of our people.
Guyana's Court of Appeal is set to rule on the legal challenge seeking to prevent the Elections Commission GCOM from using the results of the recount from the March 2nd elections to make a final decision. The announcement was made by the president of the court's panel, Justice Don Gregory. Esling David, a private citizen and government supporter, filed the lawsuit calling on GCOM to disclose whether the general and regional elections were fair and credible before announcing the results. However, GCOM says only the High Court has jurisdiction to determine the validity and credibility of the polls. Argentina's coronavirus deaths crossed 1,000 on Sunday, and infections spiked to over 40,000 as cases in Latin America surged past the 2 million mark.
1,000 people have died so far as a result of the pandemic in our country. The mortality rate has fallen to 2.4% of the total number of confirmed cases, and Argentina's death rate is 21.9 cases per million residents. There are 41,204 total confirmed cases in our country since the beginning of the pandemic. 90.8 cases per 100,000 residents is the incident rate.
Bolivia's de facto president, Janine Áñez, has agreed to approve a law to hold elections on September 6th of this year. The announcement came following a meeting with the president of the Supreme Electoral Court, Salvador Romero. As such, the Bolivian people have been guaranteed that they will be able to elect a leader democratically 10 months after the successful coup against President Evo Morales. For her part, Áñez said that she will work to have safe elections with the least amount of possible infections of COVID-19. Chile remains among the worst hit countries by the COVID-19 pandemic, registering over 7,000 dead. Nonetheless, social organizations have continuously condemned the response by the government of President Sebastián Piñera.
In many neighborhoods, citizens gather to distribute food to those in need. But even this act could now be punished by the law with up to 5 years in prison, thanks to a new law that was rushed through Congress to achieve this goal.
We believe the government has once again chosen to use violence to fight social conflicts, and their decisions goes against all logic, as their own data shows that only half of those detained for allegedly breaking this new law actually broke the law.
Chile's already overpopulated prisons have welcomed around 2,500 political prisoners under this new law.
We want to show solidarity and help make this issue visible. All the political prisoners that have been unconstitutionally detained since last year. There are many Mapuche citizens detained who have historically been enemies of the state.
They are criminalizing social movements. They are ignoring entire sectors of poor population, those most in need. Who is going to catch COVID-19? Poor people. And one person will infect many others. People are already rising up against the state across the country. This will go on, a new rebellion. Meanwhile, the government has been forced to admit they hit 3,000 deaths.
We matched the rise of cases with those of other countries, and we managed to figure out the number of possible cases. It was very hard to do this.
Meanwhile, the communist lawyer of the Coleta commune presented the first legal case against the president and his ministers.
Welcome back to From the South. More news now. The International Criminal Court prosecutors have appealed the acquittal of former Ivory Coast President Laurent Gbagbo on charges of crimes against humanity. Gbagbo and co-accused Charles Blegut were in January of 2019 cleared of allegations masterminding post-electoral violence in late 2010, which claimed more than 3,000 lives.
The trial shall erred by acquitting Mr. Gbagbo and Mr. Blegudet in violation of its fundamental obligations under Article 74.5.
This and other objective facts all point in one direction: that the majority had not completed the full reasoning exercise required by Article 74.5 by the time they orally acquitted in January 2019.
However, the victims' right to truth, justice, and eventually reparation have been prejudiced by the overall failure of a trial chamber to conduct fair proceedings, and even more so by the errors identified in the prosecution brief.
Authorities in Ivory Coast say they have captured the leader of an armed group that carried out a deadly attack on a military post on June 11th. 10 soldiers died when dozens of heavily armed attackers carried out a pre-dawn attack on the camp located on the border with Burkina Faso.
We traced it back to the commander in Mali, who was arrested. And I can tell you that the head of the commando who led the action was taken yesterday. And with our investigations, we will go further. We will establish who he was in contact with and who is behind it.
In South Africa, the Economic Freedom Fighters Party, EFF, has rejected plans by the South African Broadcasting Corporation to retrench 600 workers. A statement by the party said there was no justification for laying off workers at a time when the state broadcaster is experiencing a notable financial stability and audience growth. The party has appealed to workers' unions to reject what it described as ridiculous and narrow reasoning that seeks to thrive at the expense of the livelihoods of workers. And still in South Africa, security forces have clashed with public transport operators and drivers who block roads and highways across the country in protest against the COVID-19 relief package offered by the government. The drivers affiliated to the SA National Taxi Council, Santaco, said the relief that the government has offered to the public transport industry to mitigate the impact of the coronavirus lockdown on the industry is insufficient. The government has offered to pay $250 per vehicle, but the drivers are demanding a payment of $1,000 per vehicle. Tunisian police used tear gas to disperse protesters demanding jobs. The protesters from Tunisia's energy sector blocked roads with burning tires. For weeks, demonstrators at a protest camp in the southern Tataouni region have been demanding authorities to fulfill the promise of creating more jobs in the gas and oil sector. From Monday, Trinidad and Tobago will enter phase 5 of easing coronavirus restrictions. This will see bars, beaches, casinos, cinemas, gyms, and malls resume operations. The borders, the sole part of phase 6, remains closed. However, the Prime Minister says CARICOM countries are being pressured by large airlines to reopen.
Those countries that have big airlines that service us all the time, a lot of pressure on our CARICOM neighbors now to open their borders to those transport under the understanding that if they don't do it now, they won't be able to do it for another 6 months and they would miss the winter season, so you better get on board now. That's the kind of pressure that my colleagues are under. And I don't know that that is the best way to be having to deal with it, but the airlines are making that offer. If you want to get in on the winter transport, if things get better, you may find that you have no transport if your system gets better.
Antigua and Barbuda's Prime Minister Gaston Brown has hinted at the possibility that the country could host early elections. In a Facebook post last week, Brown said his 6-year-old Labour Party, which has 15 seats, would win all the 17 in the parliament based on the slate of candidates of the opposition United Progressive Party, or UPP. He added that the polls constitutionally due in 2023 could be as early as November of next year. Brown made the revelation after a list with names of UPP candidates began circulating. Amid global concerns about police brutality, the Caribbean island of Belize is addressing allegations of sexual misconduct in the upper ranks of the Defense Force. This follows an investigation that started in January into complaints of sexual advances and sexual assault against women.
And we have to do a little more vetting to ensure that we have the right people doing the training, because they're all trained as instructors, but just to have the right personality to train civilians who want to be soldiers now. There are female instructors who are assigned to that location. So to continue to have to say that there are these culture of sexual assaults and allegations, I don't believe it is a culture. It might be a one-off, two-off incident that we try and address immediately, because that is not something that we want to perpetrate here in the force.
The Caribbean is suffering from a plume of Saharan dust that emerged off Western Africa last weekend. This dry dust plume, known as Saharan air layer or SAL, traveled over 3,000 miles across the Atlantic Ocean to the eastern Caribbean Sea. According to the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration's Hurricane Research Division, it commonly forms from late spring through early fall and moves into the tropical Atlantic Ocean every 3 to 5 days. People with respiratory illnesses are urged to stay indoors. Welcome back to From the South. More news now. The World Health Organization has warned that the COVID-19 pandemic is far from over and is accelerating, with effects expected to be felt for decades.
The pandemic is still accelerating. It took more than 3 months for the first 1 million cases to be reported. The last 1 million cases were reported in just 8 days. But we know the pandemic is so much more than a health crisis. It's an economic crisis, a social crisis, and in many countries, a political crisis. Its effects will be felt for decades to come.
The Chinese Foreign Ministry has condemned continued stigmatization of the country by the United States President Donald Trump after he called the COVID-19 flu during a rally.
We have noted the relevant remarks. The WHO and international community explicitly oppose linking the virus to any specific country or region and oppose stigmatization. China resolutely opposes the use of the virus origin to stigmatize any country. We have noticed that many insightful people in the US have publicly condemned using the epidemic to stigmatize others or issue racist remarks.
The COVID-19 lockdown imposed in India has left the LGBTQ community members vulnerable to discrimination and abuse. The lockdown has closed a safe nest for the LGBTQ members, and they have been forced to brave staying in homes in a society where homosexuality is criminalized.
The fact that people are locked down and unable to move out is kind of putting them in situations where they do not have access to their community peers, they do not have access to community spaces, and that kind of is very, very stifling for a lot of people. It can be very, very triggering because you are stuck in a family that's probably heteronormative, that doesn't know about your sexuality, your gender identity, and that kind of causes one level of stress, especially if you're not out. Okay.
Germany's airline Lufthansa has been dropped from the country's blue chip stock index as the company's shares drop by 5.8%. Lufthansa was left out of the DAX index after its stock price fell due to the coronavirus outbreak. The drop comes ahead of a crunch meeting between the German airline's biggest shareholder, Heinz-Hermann Thiel, and Germany's economics minister on Monday to discuss a $10 billion rescue package for the troubled company.
Without Corona, Lufthansa will definitely still be in the DAX. Lufthansa did a good job in the last 3 years. They had to compete with competition from Asia and Arab world, which was subsidized by governments. That has not been done so far for Lufthansa, but will be done in the near future. But you have to say it is a shame because they've done a good job so far.
2 people have been killed and 7 others wounded in a shooting in North Carolina. The shooting happened at a party that was a continuation of Juneteenth celebrations on Beatty's Ford Road in northern Charlotte. Former North Carolina State Senator and current Charlotte City Council member has dismissed any links to the shooting with the Juneteenth celebration, describing the incident a Charlotte problem.
What happened last night had nothing to do with the celebration that occurred on Friday night in terms of really celebrating Juneteenth. Last night was just an impromptu celebration of sorts, non-sanctioned by anyone, that got totally out of hand, and we simply can't have that in our community. We need to identify who did the shooting. They need to be brought to justice as soon as possible, and they need to be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law.
Russian President Vladimir Putin has paid homage to Russia's World War II heroes. President Putin toured the new Orthodox cathedral built to honor the country's military. Thousands of Russian troops are set to march in Moscow on Wednesday as the president hosts a World War II commemoration ahead of a crucial vote.
For us, the citizens of Russia, the memory of the Great Patriotic War, of all those who fought and died, who brought victory closer by all means, is absolutely sacred. It is always with us. It gives us strength to serve our country, moral confidence, from which we have no right to retreat and will never retreat.
The first robot restaurant complex in South China's Guangdong province opened on Monday, with more than 20 catering robots able to produce nearly 200 kinds of dishes to customers. Located in Shundi City, the restaurant serves Chinese food, hot pot, and fast food. Covering an area of about 2,000 square meters, the restaurant can serve nearly 600 people at the same time. The whole process from ordering food, making dishes, to serving dishes are all completed by robots, and the robot can make a dish as fast as in 20 seconds.
Chefs often say they would use a little amount of salt when cooking. It might take us more than 1,000 times to identify that amount of measurement. We broke down step by step the videos of cooking process of famous chefs and achieved digital results before inputting them into the menu system. Maybe in the future, we will have thousands of recipes when we develop household robots. Then we can introduce all the delicious dishes in the world, all made with standardized processes. Then we can enjoy tens of thousands of delicious dishes at home.
And with that, we've come to the end of this news brief. You can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. For our viewers in Africa, remember you can find us on StarSat, channel 461 in South Africa and channel 539 in Nigeria. And be sure to follow us on social media as well. For Telesur English, I am Estefania Bravo. Until next time.